I need it today. This must be important because everything has been going against me being here, right up to the diagnosis of pneumonia. But I wasn't going to be denied. This is more of a testimony. When Ryan asked me to close out the unTANGLED series, I knew I had stuff that I wanted to get, that I wanted to share from my heart, but I didn't know what it was going to be. And as I worked on it, it became a testimony. And those of you that know me well, you know I'm not the person that I used to be. I'm not even the person that I was like even a couple of years ago. I probably I was an atheist until I was 32, and next to accepting Christ, the last couple of years has probably been the biggest change in my entire life. And I say a couple of years because that's honestly kind of a guess. I don't really know. But God has definitely done something major, and I would dare say spectacular in my life. Whether other people see it or not, I know some do, but I know that for me, I'm just a different person. And Ryan and I talked a while back, and I've struggled to even put it into words because it's such a spirit-filled thing that I've really struggled to even explain it to people. And I still do, and I still will probably today. But as I gave it thought, the question I've got is, that people have asked me, which, by the way, it's a wonderful thing to have happen. And it doesn't happen nearly enough in my life. But it's a wonderful thing to have people say, man, you seem different. Instead of, wow, what's wrong with you? And it's really a great thing when people notice a difference. And I've had people ask me, they say, well, how did that happen? How did this happen that you went through this transformation? My sister asked me, and I've had a hard time putting it into words. And then filling in for Ryan today kind of forced me to put some kind of a map together. And so it started with a commandment. From there was a conversation. From there was a question. And from there was an answer. And I'll explain that. So there's a commandment first. And that was one that we all know. I think it's the most important question. For me, it's the most important question asked in the Bible. And it's in Matthew 22, and you guys, you can look it up, but you don't need to. You're going to know it when you hear it. And it's verses 35 through 40. I'll read it. One of them, an expert on the law, tested him with this question. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And I love that question because that's the kind of question I would have asked. And I probably would have worded it different because I'm not an attorney. What I probably would have said was, hey, Jesus, you have covered a lot of stuff. And there is a lot of stuff in the Bible. What do I really need to know? What's the important part? And Jesus answered, and he answered in a way for me instead of for an attorney. And he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. I love it that he says mind. I love it that this is a thinking man's faith. And then he says, this is the first and greatest commandment. And the second one is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law of the prophets hang on these two commandments. And I love that too because he says to love your neighbor as yourself. So that implies that we should love ourselves. I didn't catch that for the longest time. And a lot of us struggle with that. A lot of us will give grace to our neighbor or grace to our kids or grace to our spouse, and we're pretty unforgiving of ourselves. But this commandment, I knew this commandment fairly early on. Clarence Ferris, we heard this in one of the very first Bible studies I ever attended. And so I thought, all right, I can work on that, because I was still thinking at that point that I had to know all of this. Like I had to be able to just whoop it on people, And then I thought, well, I could probably do that. And so while that was in my head, it never really took hold of my heart like it should have. And I wasn't all that loving of my neighbors. And by the way, just to be clear, in the year 2020, your neighbor is the entire planet. Between cheap airfare and smartphones, our government's going to have a much harder time lying to us going forward because we can talk to those people. Most of the world is now on a smartphone. I remember when I was in Africa, I was watching a woman sweep outside the airport, and I thought, I wonder how poor she is. She reached in her pocket and got out a cell phone. I thought, well, she's got enough money, got her cell phone, So we're all connected now. So the whole world is our neighbor. And I think that's an important thing to remember. Your neighbor isn't the guy next door. It isn't just that person. It's the whole world. So it was a commandment that started nudging me the right direction. And I think of this, my journey, as putting our houseboat in the slip. When you put a houseboat in a slip, it's not easy. Because for one, it barely fits. And for another, the wind catches it like a sail. So you end up kind of bouncing your way in. You get the nose in, and then you just start, they call it jockeying. And you're just jockeying with the throttle to get it walked in. And that's kind of how my journey has been. And so the second thing, as I look back at these moments in my life that nudged me back the right direction, was a conversation I had in Seward, Alaska. In Seward, Alaska, I was walking one morning several years ago, and in Alaska, if you've never been there, you need to go. It's an amazing place. The mountains in the continental United States are just as beautiful as the mountains in Alaska, but they're not surrounded by water, and they're not filled by weirdos. And here's what I mean by that. You will meet the strangest people in Alaska you will ever meet in your life. There is every type of human being you could ever imagine. There is what you would expect. There's like the mountain man type. There are the natives, Inupiats, Inuits, some. You'll see those. You'll see there's a fairly large hippie contingent there. In fact, just down the road from Seward, walking distance, there's a little hippie colony. You'll know it when you get there, by the way. So there's just people that never fit anywhere else, and they ran to Alaska and found a bunch of other people that didn't fit. And so it's just a really interesting place because of the people as much as anything else. And in Alaska, even if you have money, no one takes care of their yard. Their summers are really short. They're gorgeous. It's an amazing thing because like we have spring flowers, early summer flowers, late summer flowers, fall months. They don't have that. Their summer's about that long and everything blooms at once. It's the most gorgeous thing you've ever seen in your life. What people don't realize is Alaska's a rainforest. It's just, we think tropical rainforest. It's not tropical, but it's a rainforest. So it's wet and everything is gorgeous when it blooms. So, but people don't take care of their yards. And so I was in Seward, Alaska, there was a little house for sale that stuck out like a sore thumb. And it was a little like a ranch style house. That was odd because a lot of the houses there just don't look finished. But it was a ranch style house, but more importantly, the yard was mowed in straight lines. Now, as the guy that's a little OCD, I like a yard mowed in straight lines. And I like for it to be mowed down and back so you can see the stripes. And so this guy, this little house, and it was for sale, right in Seward, Alaska. A little side note here that means nothing to the message, but you know you're in Alaska when the Little League is on waterfront property. The Little League Diamond is on waterfront property. If that was anywhere else, there'd be a condo there. And so the, is that thunder?
It's the microphone's touching the table.
Oh, okay. If I move it, will that help? I thought God was mad at me. I thought, I'm just doing my best, man. Come on. Where's that grace you're always talking about? And so there's this little house for sale, perfectly mowed yard, and the guy's even out there with a leaf blower blowing the grass, the clippings off of the driveway. It looked like the house belonged in Pendleton. And so I talked to the guy for a moment. But what I noticed was right next door was a house that looked like junk. And I know he owned a lawnmower because it was right in the car. It was right in the yard with weeds growing up around it right next to a car sitting there with one wheel off. And I thought, wow, man. So I walked over and just complimented the guy. Boy, what a great looking place. I wished I was looking to buy. And he said, well, I wish you was too. And he was a nice guy, and he was a retired firefighter. And I finally asked him, I said, does that bother you? And he said, what's that? And I said, well, you got your house looking so nice, and obviously it's up for sale. Does it bother you that you got Jungle Jim living next door over there that only uses a lawnmower to keep the car company? And he looked so confused by that question. And I mean, I can remember this like it was yesterday. He looked so confused, and he said, what do you mean? I said, his yard. I said, you're trying to sell your house. And I said, your neighbor's yard looks like a junk heap. And I said, your place looks like, does that bother you? And he says, well, that's his yard. And he was dead serious. He said, well, that's his yard. And I said, in Indiana, there would have been gunfire by now. There would have been blood in the streets by now over this. And he said, here in Seward, we're a long way from a Walmart or a lot of other things that people take for granted. And he said, we'll get somewhere between 7 and 12 feet of snow this year. And he said, there's an excellent chance that at some point this winter, either I'm going to need him or he's going to need me. And his exact words were, and I don't think either one of us is going to give a damn what the grass looks like under that snow. And I just was like, yeah, that's right, and I'm a moron. I'm a moron, and I live in a state with a lot of other morons that think just like me. And so that was another little nudge. That right there was Matthew 7 about the speck and the plank being acted out by a retired fireman and being explained to a guy that claimed to be a Christian. That was him saying, I don't care about his yard. That's my neighbor. I can count on him. He's going to help me when I need it, and I'm going to help him when he needs it. And so that was a little nudge, a little further in the slip with the houseboat. Just a little further. I got the nose in now. So it was a commandment first, and then it was a conversation that led me to where I am now. But this took a long time. So I can say fast forward, but really the truth is slow forward, because I'm a slow learner. So slow forward. And the next major point that nudged me into the slip was a message that Pastor Trey gave. And it was out of Genesis. And it was the 32nd chapter of Genesis, and some of you might remember the sermon. I think it was probably a good one, but I don't remember much of the sermon. But what I remember is what it was about, and I remember the question. It was about Jacob wrestling with God. And, excuse me a minute. They got me on some medicine to dry out my lungs, and it apparently dries everything. So, it was about Jacob wrestling. It's a weird story. Jacob wrestles with a man, and then some people, in some passages says it different. But the bottom line is, by the end you realize he was wrestling with God. And he wrestled all night with God. And at one point, God touched Jacob on the hip, and Jacob walked away with a limp, as far as we know, for the rest of his life. Jacob walked away with one heck of a limp. And then Trey asked the question. Everybody knew that Jacob had had a close encounter. Where's your limp? If you've had a close encounter with God, how's come you're walking just like you did before? How's come you're talking just like you did before? How's come you're living just like you did before? If you claim to have had a close encounter with God, there should be something noticeably different about you. That knocked me right back on my heels. That was a painful question because, as I've said before, I fit into the world way too well. I don't look like an alien passing through. I look like I belong here, and that's not really what we're supposed to do. We should look a little bit more like a square peg than we do. And so, in my mind, how that started to work, and normally I'll whip an answer on you right away. I don't need to know the answer. I'll whip something together. I'm a Dwiggins, and I'll throw you an answer and get you off of me. But that one really struggled. I struggled with that, and it was probably a couple weeks that went by, and I finally told Tierley, I think I've got my limp. And she looked at me like I had a horn coming out of my head. And I said, no, I really do. I think I figured out what I want. And what I didn't realize was that was the day I found a direction for my life. And because what I pictured was when I was dead, which, let's face it, I'm in the 3rd trimester of life, baby. I'm not middle-aged unless I'm going to live to be 112. So, in the 3rd trimester of life, a fetus pretty much looks like a human being. It kind of looks like the finished project. So, now heading towards 57, I should be starting to look like the finished project. And so I decided, I found out what I wanted the finished project to be, the finished product. I wanted it to be, and I don't have this done, but I've got direction. When I'm dead, I hope that the funeral home is full of laughter. And I hope that people are telling all the stupid, funny stuff I did, crazy stuff I did, offensive stuff I did, all of that. I hope it's nothing but shared stories. Because I won't be in misery. I'll be in glory. So you don't need to be whining for me. But what I want people to be saying is Eric Dwiggins loved everybody and had a great time doing it. And that became my focus for my life, was to love everybody and have a good time doing it. And what happened was I started having a good time pretty quick. And the truth is, I've always kind of had a good time. But I started making an effort to have a good time and to invite other people to join my good time. That's about the time the coffee ministry started, where I joke around with people and buy their coffee. People are very resistant to free coffee, by the way, which is it's a great fun to force coffee on people. I enjoy it immensely. And I've told this one before. I'll tell you one more. But like, this is not in the notes. But like, I had a woman. Everybody turns down coffee at least once. I've only had 2 people gladly accept coffee like you're supposed to. This is a lesson for all of us. We suck at accepting. We're good at giving. We're terrible at accepting. And the only 2 people I've ever had just said, well, thank you, man, was a German Baptist and a hippie. Total opposites. And they got it. It was like, well, thank you. They just took the coffee. But I had a woman a while back, dressed very professional. And I look for people that just stick out. Maybe they look excessively happy. Maybe they look excessively mad. Maybe they look like a German Baptist. Maybe they look like they just came from a Grateful Dead concert. It's just something that sticks out, and I'll buy their coffee. Well, this woman just looked pretty mad. And so I'm ahead of her in line, and I said, I'm going to get her coffee. And she heard me, and she said, no, you're not buying my coffee. I said, I got her coffee. And she said, no, you don't. Now, very few people will turn it down a third time. And I said, I've already got it. And the cashier is frozen. And I said, ring it up. And she said, you don't have to do that. And she said, I just, don't be buying my coffee. And that's when I finally turned around with a smile on my face. By now we got people. And I said, do you think there's any chance you could whip me? And she said, well, no. And I said, well, how do you think you're going to stop me from buying that coffee then? And I turned around to the cashier and I said, ring that coffee up. And they were ringing then. They weren't kidding around. And so I turned around, I smiled real big at her, and I said, I hope you have a good day. I said, when's the last time a total stranger did something nice for you? And she said, it's been a while. And I said, well, maybe if you weren't so resistant, they'd do it more. And everybody laughed, and she laughed, and I had all that fun for $1.50. And so that's where the fun's, that's kind of one of the things where I start, I'm going to have fun wherever I go, as much as I can. The problem came with the love part, because remember, I said at my funeral, I wanted people to talk about that I loved everybody and that I had fun doing it. And I was struggling with the love part still. Sometimes with my own family that I knew the most. Sometimes it was easier to love a stranger. And I want to tell you right now, I want to confess, I haven't been really seriously tested on this yet. Because there's going to come a point where I'm going to love someone that I can't love, and I'm going to have Jesus come into my life and love him through me. Someone's eventually going to do something to me, or my kid, that makes it very difficult for me to love them. And I'm going to have to count on Jesus then. But he hasn't let me down so far on this whole crazy love thing, where I've become the love guy, as I call it, a redneck hippie. I started getting into archaeology, and through podcasts and one thing and another, and I started becoming obsessed with past civilizations. And as I learned about these past civilizations, I find out that how much we have in common with them. They didn't have a smartphone, these hunter-gatherers, but they were trying to communicate the best that they could. And one of the ways they did that was with art. Some of these hunter-gatherers did art way better than I can. And in some of the earliest cave drawings from all over the world, there's clear pictures of something like God. In one of the earliest ones ever found, I believe it's in France, there's a picture of someone who's dead, and there's something that looks like a dove ascending out of their chest into heaven. God. God. The book of Genesis tells us in the very first chapter that God created man in his image and created woman in his image. And so it doesn't say God created Americans in his image. It doesn't say, it just says men all of us. I think that means the earliest men right up to all the ones that's going to live long after me. And God's very clear about the love thing, that we're supposed to love everyone. We're supposed to love everyone. It's the most important commandment he gives us after loving him, is to love all of our neighbors. Well, I've come to the conclusion, and I said this once before up here, I am a timeless creature. This body is not timeless, but my soul is eternal. I'm going to live after this body is wore out. We serve an eternal God. Time means nothing to God. And so if it means nothing to him, it shouldn't mean a whole lot to me. So to me, what that means in my crazy redneck hippie mind, I got to love cavemen. I got to love people from the 1300s. I've got to love people from the future. I got to love everybody. They're all my neighbors, because I'm not stopped by geography anymore. And because I'm a Christian, I'm not stopped by time. I'm supposed to be a love conduit for the whole world. I struggled with that until I started to realize, holy smokes, we're all related. We're all related. And I was talking to a hippie in San Francisco this past September when I was there. And we had a similar conversation to that. And he said, yeah, man, we're all related. The cradle of life. I said, well, we don't really know that. And he says, what do you mean? I said, well, we don't really know where the cradle of life is. I said, we think we know with man's arrogance, but we really don't know. But it doesn't really matter where it is. And I said, it's way bigger than that. And we're having this really quiet conversation, me and this young Middle Eastern hippie. But by the way, we were in like a big pot store. I should mention that. They didn't sell pot, but it was at the Haight-Ashbury, if you've ever heard of the Haight-Ashbury. That's where the Summer of Love kicked off. That's where Janis Joplin lived. That's where Jimi Hendrix lived. That's where the whole hippie movement exploded. And I was at the intersection of Haight and Asbury at a 2-story business that sold nothing but hippie stuff and pot stuff. And so we're standing there, me and this young hippie, and he's talking about the cradle of life, and I said, it's way bigger than that. And he says, what do you mean? And so if you have your bulletin, these are the 2 pictures I used when I talked to my hippie friend. And the one that's more peachy colored, that doesn't have an arrow, I showed him that picture. And I said, do you know what that is? And he says, no. And I said, it's a fetus. He said, it's a what? I said, it's a fetus. I said, it's a baby. And it's a baby when it first starts to take shape in the womb. And he goes, wow. I said, yeah, look at that big weird eye, man. And he said, that's pretty cool. I said, well, you don't know how cool it is. And I said, here, I'll show you another one. And so I showed him the other one. I said, you know what that is? He said, yeah, it's a fetus. I said, good for you, man. He's learning. And so we talked about it. I said, it's pretty hard to tell which one's black and which one's white. Pretty hard to tell which one's going to keep his yard mowed and which one's not going to care. It's pretty hard to tell which one's going to be a Catholic, which one's going to be an atheist. It's pretty hard to tell if one of them's going to be a Muslim. It's really hard to tell. I can tell. And I'll tell you how I know. Because the one with the arrow, that's a blue whale. That's not even a human being. Wow is the right answer. We're all related. We're all related. Get that through your thick heads, people. We are all related. And it's bigger. It's bigger than the cradle of civilization. It's bigger than loving your neighbor. It's loving the world. There is one true God, one true Creator, and I don't care what anyone else calls Him. I don't care where they're right and we're wrong. I don't care where we're wrong and they're right. There is one true Creator, and that Creator sent Christ to die for our sins, and that Messiah told us to love everybody. Amen? Amen. This series has been in John, and it's called Untangled. And there's a lot in my life that's still tangled. But understanding my role is no longer tangled. God has made it very clear to me, Eric, you are out of the judgment business because you suck at it. That whole thing of love the sinner but hate the sin, yeah, Eric, you suck at that. And so you just need to be loving people, fat boy. You just go love. You let someone else handle judgment. I'm not saying there's no place for judgment. I'm definitely not saying there's no place for judgment in the church. I'm saying that God has told me you can clock out from that because you are horrible at it. My judgment for the sin ends up looking like judgment on the sinner. I don't want to be that guy. If I'm going to take a butt chewing when I get to the pearly gates, what I hope it is I think you were just too easy on people. I'll take that one. Let me take that one. Let me take the Eric, you were just too loving. I'll take a shot with that. I don't want to be the guy that goes around pointing stuff out in your eye. If you need help, if you need advice, you can ask me, and I'll probably be way more blunt than you want. But as far as that voluntary judgment thing, I'm out of that business. The 5th chapter of 1 John, the 20th verse it is, I think. Let me make sure I'm telling you right before I do it. It says, we know we are children of God and that the whole world is under the control of the evil one. But here's the key. Is the 20th verse. We know also that the Son of God has come and has given us understanding. I really believe that God has given me this understanding. So that we may know Him who is true. It's harder and harder to lie to me about your heart. It's getting harder and harder to lie to me about your heart. It says, and we are in Him who is true, even in His Son Jesus Christ. And then it says what I think really sums the whole thing up. He is the true God and eternal life. If you don't have love for everybody, love for the unlovable, love for the unloved, love for the people that have too much love, if there is such a thing. If you don't have love for everybody, you're cheating yourself. Because I'm telling you now, my life is so much easier going out into the world with a heart of love for people. It has changed everything. It has changed everything. It has been a radical change. And if you need one more excuse to love people, 2 Peter 4:8. I'm going to tell you right now, I still sin a lot. And it's not like sometimes I slip and sin. Sometimes I sin, period. I sometimes think I shouldn't do that, and I go right on and do it. Paul talks about that. So, here, if you need one more reason to love everybody, here's a good one. Love Love each other deeply, it says. Peter says, love each other deeply. Do you know why? For love not just covers, love covers over a multitude of sins. I need that. I need that. Because trust me, I am no saint. I am doing it wrong a lot of the time. But I can honestly say, maybe for the first time in my Christian walk of over 2 decades, I have found true north for me. And I may still bang that boat up, getting it the rest of the way in the slip, but I got the nose in now. And in the boating world, the whole thing is if you got the nose in, you're home. And there's times you come in, that wind's blowing, and it picked up while you're out, and holy cow, it sure feels good when the nose is in the slip, because you can jockey it in from there. And I'll tell you something else about that as a Christian. When you get the nose into the slip, your other boaters will come and help you get it in the rest of the way. That's what we're supposed to do. Us Christians, we're supposed to be ready to come help somebody get their nose into the slip. So that's what I brought for you today. I told Ryan, I don't have an ending for this. I said, I don't have one. I was out driving around in the wee hours of this morning, just going over this in my head, trying to come up with an ending, and I don't have an ending. But what we are going to do is, I think the worship team is going to come up and do another song. And if you want to come pray, obviously we always do that. The altars are always open. And so you guys can come on up, whoever's going to be a part of the...
Actually just me.
It's just you. What a treat. So she's going to sing a song. If you want to just sit there and enjoy it, that's probably what I'm going to do. If you want to come pray, come up and pray. And let me tell you something. If you see somebody you think needs to pray, well, it's been a while since someone just grabbed them and said, hey, come up here and pray with me. So there you go. She's going to sing us a song.
The Lord was actually tugging on my heart during the testimony time. And he tends to do that because I'm not a fan of standing up here in front of all of you guys talking. I can sing in front of you, that's fine, it's all good. But to talk is not my thing. But I just wanted to thank this church. We came a long way from home to move here, and it was not an easy decision. It was not an easy thing, especially for me to do. I mean, Brent's all excited about going to school, and that's great, and I will support him 110%. But I just want to thank this church for being a family to us. We jumped in here real quick, and I just want to thank you all for being there for us and for praying for us. God has provided, good jobs for both of us, a good place for us to call home for the moment. And Brent's really enjoying school, and we're enjoying the people that we've gotten a chance to meet and get to know and to love. So thank you for that.
We're glad to have you.
Thank you. But I'm going to sing this song now. This is one of my favorite ones, and please feel free to worship with me. It's a slow song, but just feel free to worship with me. If you want to come pray, please do so. If somebody comes to pray and you feel like praying with them, please do so. But just worship with me today. In and out of situations that tug of war at me, all day long I struggle
that looks just like us, and it's going to become the biggest creature on the earth. And he leans his head back, he pushes back, and he goes, just like this, dude, you are rocking my world. And it was one of my favorite moments of the entire trip to San Francisco. So, my advice to you is, if at all possible, dude, go out there and rock somebody's world with some love. You guys are dismissed.